So today we're welcoming Dr. Joseph Richardson, who received a PhD from Rutgers University and has so many titles. It's going to take a while just to introduce him. Dr. Richardson is the Joel and Kim Feller Endowed Professor of African American Studies and Anthropology at the University of Maryland. So why don't we start there for a second and talk a little bit about that endowment and what does it support?
Sure, thank you for inviting me to talk today. So the Joel and Kim Feller Endowment was awarded to me, I believe, in 2019, and the award supports my research on gun violence. And I've been doing this work for a significant amount of time, even as a doctoral student at Rutgers, where I focused on adolescent violence among youth in Harlem, which was the focus of my dissertation while I was there. And those who don't know much about gun violence, just to give a little fact, like since 1996, there's been the Dickey Amendment, which has essentially prohibited the federal government from funding gun violence research. So there hasn't been research funding from the NIH and the CDC for almost 25 years. And last year was the first year that the CDC and the NIH created funding mechanisms to support gun violence research. So you have to think for almost 25 years, there's been no federal research dollars for gun violence research. So my dean is very supportive of the work, Dean Greg Ball at University of Maryland and College of Behavioral and Social Sciences. And so when I was promoted to full professor, I was awarded this fellowship to support the gun violence research that I'm currently working on.
Oh, that's great. Congratulations on that. Let's work backwards a little bit. You began your extensive educational journey at the University of Virginia with a degree in African and African American Studies. And after earning a doctorate from our program, you completed not one, not two, but 3 postdoc fellowships at the University of Chicago, Morehouse College, and the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. Clearly, you saw a need to build on your previous social science-oriented education with medicine. Why is this so important? And specifically, why is it important to the African American community?
So before we move on, we just want to make a correction. I had a postdoc at the University of Chicago and postdoctoral training at Morehouse College, Morehouse School of Medicine, and University of North Carolina School of Medicine. So one was an NIMH clinical postdoctoral training program, and the other was a Spencer Foundation postdoctoral research fellowship, which was at Chicago. So the Morehouse and the North Carolina was combined. But to your point, why do I think it's important, critically important, to engage medicine in this space? Is that the question?
Mm-hmm.
Without question, I mean, if you look at all the statistics on African Americans, particularly Black men, gun violence is the leading cause of death for young Black men between the ages of 15 and 34 years old. And I believe it's leading cause of death also between Black Americans between 15 and 45 overall, right? So why is that so critically important? Well, for years, even though these statistics are so startling, there hasn't been a public health response to the reduction of gun violence among this specific population. And I think if it were any other population in this country, we would have devoted clearly more resources to it. You only need to look as far as what I mentioned earlier in terms of the Dickey Amendment and the lack of research funding to support gun violence research, which ultimately would have informed why gun violence is a leading cause of death within Black communities. I mean, Black African Americans are 10 times more likely to die from gun violence than white Americans, and 18 times more likely to suffer from a violent assault by a firearm. So these are all things that intersect with the medical system. And ultimately, if you are shot, whether you may survive or not, you are going to engage with the healthcare system either way. And the healthcare system should be at the forefront of dealing with this issue, right? And I don't believe that it's just a criminal justice problem, but it's a public health problem, and it's an epidemic in this country and has been at a crisis level for decades, and it deserves significant attention and visibility, but resources as well, in order to create some effective interventions. And so the only way that you can do that is through engaging both the healthcare and the criminal justice system, which is why my work intersects the two.
Great. I think it's definitely timely to well, it's always been timely, right? But it's definitely timely right now to really have this research and to expand on it and to actually act on it, and help not only the Black community, Black men, but also just Americans in general. And I think it's something that it's a good intersection that solves problems, but also just shines light on some problems and some inequities and some shortcomings of the government, like you talked about with the Dickey Amendment and others. So great work for you to be doing. You're the founder and director of Travail, which stands for Transformative Research Applied Violence Intervention Lab, a lab which uses a multidisciplinary approach to reduce gun violence. Obviously, this is a complicated network of factors. You are observing and studying and trying to find patterns that will help reduce violence. How did you come up with such an intricate and sophisticated methodology?
Again, just basing my work on the intersection of the healthcare and the criminal justice system and the ways that young men who are involved in the criminal justice system often show up within our nation's trauma centers. I started my work at the two busiest trauma centers in the state of Maryland, University of Maryland, Prince George's Hospital Center, which is now known as University of Maryland Capital Region Health, and then the University of Maryland, R. Adams Cali Shock Trauma Center, where I worked with my mentor, Dr. Carnell Cooper, who is a trauma surgeon and one of the nation's leading pioneers in hospital-based violence intervention programs, which he started one in the late 1990s at Shock Trauma in Baltimore to work with primarily young Black men who are survivors of violent firearm injury to prevent them from coming back to the hospital again for a penetrative injury. And so I worked with him in the outset of my career in like 2010, 2011. And ultimately, while he was the chief medical officer of University of Maryland, Prince George's Hospital Center, he allowed me to use that trauma center, which is a level 2 trauma center and the second busiest in the state, as my research lab. And so there I started a qualitative study and, continuing my trajectory as a qualitative researcher, which started at Rutgers. And I used that trauma center to understand the risk factors that would bring violently injured young Black men back to the hospital for a repeat injury. And did that study for 2 years, from 2013 to 2015. And I spent that time understanding what the lives of young Black men were like. I followed 25 young Black men. And in 2017, I used that data to inform the development and implementation of a hospital violence prevention program out of that trauma center there, which became one of 40 hospital violence intervention programs in the world. And one of my study participants, Che Bullock, actually became one of the first people that I hired on my staff. So he went from study participant to actually a key and integral member of the staff, and served as a violence intervention specialist for the program, meaning that he met all of our violently injured patients and potential participants at bedside, which is called the golden hour. So if you are able to engage young Black men within 72 hours while they're in the hospital, you're more than likely to persuade them to engage in services. And often young Black men are traditionally estranged and disconnected from healthcare services, and particularly mental health services that can address the traumatic stress that's associated with their injury, but also the trauma that's occurring over the course of their lives, right? So we have young Black men who have adverse childhood experiences of trauma that have gone undiagnosed and unaddressed. And we need to provide services to that population, which is one of the reasons why they may be showing up in the hospital, because they have undiagnosed and untreated trauma, which often plays out in their high-risk behavior. So that program started in 2017, and I co-founded that with another trauma surgeon there, Ronnie Benoit, and an ED physician, Dr. Kyle Fisher. And directed the program for 2 years, from 2017 to 2019, and we had significant success. We had 116 participants, and one person came back for an injury. Why that's so important is the trauma recidivism rate in the country ranges anywhere between 5 and 65%, which means that if you had 10 people that were lying in a hospital bed and they all had gunshot wounds, 6 out of the 10 this was their second, third, fourth, maybe fifth time there. So 1 out of 16, if you do the math, is less than 1%, a trauma recidivism rate. So we were quite successful. We were the first program to be accepted into the National Network of Hospital Violence Intervention Programs, which is the national network I mentioned, which is comprised of over 40 programs, and that now is called the Hobby. We had significant success, and we're the premier hospital violence prevention program at that time in the DC metro area. So again, it's important to, as I've been saying through this entire conversation, that we take serious attention and concern to the ways that the criminal justice system and the healthcare system intersect, and primarily because the number one risk factor for bringing someone back to the hospital outside of being previously injured is if they've been previously incarcerated. And so a study that I conducted at Shock Trauma in Baltimore among Black men who have been injured, we found that the number one risk factor for bringing them back to the hospital was if they had a previous history of incarceration. And there are many reasons why that could be. One, we know that felony disenfranchisement for Black men is higher than any other racial or ethnic group, meaning that it's often, once you have a felony record, it's very difficult to get a job. It's very difficult to get into, you can't get in public housing if you have a drug felony. You can't get food stamps. You can't get a Pell Grant or student loan. So essentially become a second-class citizen, forcing you to go back to the lifestyle that led you to the hospital in the first place. So we know that. We also know that there are tremendous traumatic effects of being incarcerated, which we have not thoroughly explored, right? So if you combine the impact of felony disenfranchisement, the trauma of being incarcerated, and then having absolutely no options while you're out here trying to survive, getting a gun and engaging in high-risk behaviors becomes, a mode of economic survival. And I think people don't understand the complexity of that. And so it's the onus and my responsibility is to show the people what that looks like on the ground, not from 30,000 feet and not from, doing drive-by research, but actually through true immersion to understand the context of the ways that these multiple factors within this ecosystem play out.
I'm gonna take a tangent for 1 second here to one of the points that you made about kind of the trauma and how that kind of grows and feeds into a person, almost starts into a revolving cycle. A couple of years ago, my wife used to teach in Patterson. She had students in the kindergarten level who were seeing trauma and seeing gun violence. multiple students throughout a given year. And I always used to just think of how that, messes with their psyche and
Right.
traumatizes them, and then almost kind of creates a callus over them where gun violence, just violence in general, is the norm, right? And just creates this, like I said, this revolving door, or this vicious cycle of, I grew up around it, so I'm desensitized to it, and now I'm okay with it. And it's just interesting to hear that there are folks at the PhD level and people who are doing research and trying to create programs that intervene on those little young Black and brown faces on their behalf to try to slow it down if they can't prevent it. So it's good work. I do appreciate what you're doing. You talked a little bit about the hospital intervention. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Those are the adverse childhood experiences that contribute to that high risk behavior among the young men that we work with. And I would say, 99% of the young kings that we work with have expressed trauma that has occurred while they were children, right? And it ranged from, things that are just totally horrific, right, to just cumulative small things that ultimately, if they are left unaddressed, manifest themselves into negative behaviors as you get older. So
that snowball effect.
You have to think about, when we're dealing with adults, that within, we always say, within every broken adult is a traumatized child. Right.
Absolutely.
So we have a number of young men that have gone through a lot during their lifetimes, but their trauma has never been addressed. So this is a continuum, which is why we never say it's post. It's just a continuum over the life course.
So true. You talked a little bit about your hospital violence intervention program, but you also have a digital storytelling project called Life After the Gunshot. What was the concept for the program, and what do you do with these stories, and kind of how are they effective?
So Life After the Gunshot was really a manifestation of all of the work that I've conducted ethnographically over my career, starting at Rutgers, where I wanted to show an audience what these young people look like, their body language, and their humanity. And it's difficult to do that as an ethnographer when you're just writing a book, or you're making a PowerPoint presentation and you're reading their quotes from a slide. That wasn't enough for me. And I've always been interested in film. In fact, as a postdoctoral fellow at University of Chicago, I decided at that time that I wanted to learn documentary filmmaking. So I started taking classes as a doc film student at Columbia College, which is the fine arts school in Chicago. And I started filming then and taking, a camera out, and I did a short documentary on barbershops in Chicago on the South Side. And it just fed my need to merge the visual ethnography with the work that I was already doing. And so when I started my work at Prince George's Hospital, directing the program and still conducting research while I was there, interviewing young Black men, their parents, their romantic partners, I thought it was a great time to actually utilize those skills and translate those interviews into showing people this is what the lives of these young men really look like, to humanize them. And there was an opportunity through the Center for Victims Research to do a researcher to practitioner fellowship. I applied for it, was awarded it, and I was assigned as the researcher, clearly. And my co-PI was Che Bullock, who was a violence intervention specialist in my program. And so we decided that we would take 10 of the young men that we worked with, and we would interview them and film them. And initially, they were just going to be very short digital stories. But when we completed the 10, we still had a significant amount of money left in the grant. And so my director of administrative services told me, look, you know, Dr. Richardson, you have to use the money, or you have to give it back. So I
Good
decided
problem to
that we
have.
would, yeah, good problem. So I decided that we would expand the project to include, you know, all the players and institutions that work in the gun violence space. So we started, you know, interviewing trauma surgeons and psychotherapists, violence interrupters, judges, defense attorneys, POs, the romantic partners of the young men that we work with, their parents. So we just broadened the scope of what we were doing. And then ultimately, I think it made a much richer story. And then we just brought all of those stories together with the 10 young guys, and then all of these people that are part of this system, this healthcare and criminal justice system. And we made Life After the Gunshot. So we premiered episode 1 in March. We have like 15,500 views at this point. And it's gained national attention. We've been on NPR here and now. We've been on television here in DC. We were just featured in Asahi Shimbun, which is a national magazine in Japan. So, I mean, it's gained a lot of traction, but I think more importantly, it's humanized the lives of young Black men who have been shot in ways that they can discuss their trauma, discuss structural violence, and we can hear from the surgeons and the therapists that work with them, as well as, you know, the family members who are also affected because they're their caregivers and are experiencing, you know, secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma. So it's been a great journey, and we have 3 more episodes to go. So just looking forward to the production on those. But, you know, I don't think you rarely see, you know, ethnographers actually translating, shifting over to doing the visual, but it's something that I always wanted to do. And, you know, I love doing it, and I love film, and I love doing ethnography. So it made perfect sense.
It gives them a voice and allows them to tell the story better than, and I'm sure you can do a great job telling a story, but when you give them a face and a voice, it just makes what you're trying to do that much more powerful, to say the least.
It does, and I think it gives people who know absolutely nothing about young Black men or have their own, you know, perceptions that may be framed by the media or what they've read. It gives a totally nuanced and again, complicated perspective of human beings, and everyone that's human is complex, right? And so this provides the platform for them to speak their piece, and also for people to be able to relate to them on just a human level. And many of the things that they talk about in terms of their traumatic stress are quite similar to what you would hear a soldier in Iraq or Afghanistan being affected by. And I would also like to say why that's so important. And this is a shout out to my editor, Jared Forte. He was he's a veteran, and he's been in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and now was the editor for our project, and can totally relate to everything that the guys were saying because he's also experienced those symptoms of traumatic stress, right? So it's really ironic for us to have an editor that was a soldier, you know, in 2 wars, right? That's now, you know, left the field and is now working as an editor, but had similar experiences to the young men that we were working with, even though he was a soldier. So, I think that was really important. We didn't do that intentionally. He just happened to have that background, right? But it speaks, I think the film and the series speak volumes in terms of, the humanity of our young men, but also in the ways that all of these multiple systems, they kind of traverse every single one of these systems, and these systems intersect their lives. So, we've heard people tell us that it's kind of like the real life version of The Wire, but it's just set in DC, because we touch so many institutions and spaces in the gun violence world. So yeah, we're proud of the project, and we have some other things that are coming up in the near future that are not related to men, but will focus on women that have been shot. So we're looking forward to providing and uplifting the voices of Black women that have also been survivors of gun violence, and not, domestic violence or intimate partner violence, but actually, survivors of gun violence in the street. So I don't think that story has been told. And if it has been, it hasn't been told in the way that we plan to tell it.
Well, that's great. One more research-related question here. So you've been appointed by Maryland's governor as an advisory board member for an anti-violence program. You've been appointed you've been appointed to a commission by the mayor of DC for your work. And we can clearly see that your work on gun violence is extensive.
Right.
What can the average person do to help the cause, or to learn more about the cause?
Just get involved in your community, go to a school and serve as a mentor for kids. I would say, that's probably the easiest thing, but the hardest thing that you can do, and the most rewarding, is to get involved in your community. And again, in terms of reverse childhood experiences and providing social capital for kids, right? How do we manage to get ahead? It's not just on our human capital and the education that we have, but a lot of it is based on, as it has always been in life, it's who you know, right? And how can you generate social capital for someone who may not have it? So we need more people that are going into these communities that are just going to serve, in a role as a mentor. And I think it's best to do it collectively. People are often scared to go into communities because they're really fearful of the burden that they may have to take on alone. But if you're able to engage, 3 or 4 of your friends, and you all go into a school and say, all right, I'm going to adopt so-and-so elementary or middle school down the street, and it's 4 or 5 of you, then it makes it easier for you to engage in that kind of relationship, because you're all sharing an equal burden. And then you can get fewer kids. So is it better? I heard this one time, I'm from Philadelphia, which is one of your questions. And there was at one point that our former police commissioner said, we need 10,000 men for 10,000 kids. And, I agree that we need 10,000 men, but I don't think we need 10,000 men for 10,000 kids. I think we need 10,000 men for 2,500 kids. Meaning that we need to create 4 mentors for every kid. We need to take those kids who are most at risk, right? And we know that, kids that grow up in the cities, everyone is at risk, but the kids that are at the highest risk of the at risk, and create a network of mentors. So if it was, just say, for example, you, me, and 2 of the people that we know, it's easier for us as 4 men to mentor 1 kid than it is for us to get engaged in a one-on-one relationship. And that's what we need to think about, how we can create social families for kids and get away from this Eurocentric, westernized version of mentorship, which is why it doesn't work for Black people. because it's a Eurocentric framework to think that we're going to work one-on-one. That's never been the case in the Black community. I don't know why we've even adopted that form of mentorship. So we need to think more about how we can create social families of mentors where everyone feels like they're engaged and involved and no one's taking a significant burden over another person, which is how we've survived as Black Americans.
You talked a little bit about being from Philly. I'm going to shake this question a little bit up. How has being from Philly shaped your work or just guided you to where you are today?
In my DNA, everything that I do is a representation of my neighborhood, my city, the people I know, the culture, the music, the rawness of it. You know, we're Sour Patch Kids, you know? So, you know, everything that I engage in has prepared me to do the work, you know, whether it's in Brooklyn or it's in Harlem or Southeast DC or South Side of Chicago, all of those places that I've worked and done this similar work. Philly has prepared me and set the stage for that. So, you know, there's not much more I can say about it except that it's, you know, it's in me. It's part of my DNA. It's part of my makeup. And I don't think I would be able to do the work as successfully as I have been had I not had the experiences in my neighborhood, in my family, the friends, and just being from that city that I've had, you know, over the course of my career. So, you know, you just look at Philly now, like it's one of the epicenters of gun violence in this country, right? You know, I grew up in the crack era. So I understand what it looks like to have your community devastated by crack. Like I get it. You know, I lived through that. I was an adolescent going through that. You know, I've seen my friends' parents addicted to crack. I've seen my friends addicted. I've seen older guys in my neighborhood that I looked up to get addicted to crack. You know, I've seen guys in my neighborhood murdered. So, you know, all of those things create who I am and allow that complexity, right? Who would think, you know, if you talk to me on an everyday basis, you probably wouldn't think I was a professor. But I think it's the complexity and the nuance of being raised in that environment that allowed me to kind of move through all of these different worlds, but yet remain me and true to who I am, you know, and I think that's the essence of Philly is just the realness of it, you know, and never allowing someone to get, you know, thinking that we're just totally, you know, disconnected from the place that we come from. And that doesn't mean that you have to stay there and live there for the rest of your life, but, you know, you carry that with you wherever you go and you keep it moving. So shout out to everybody from Philly.
So tell me a little bit, one, I've been writing down other questions here as we've been talking. So two last questions. The first one is, what took you to Chicago? Was it the program? Was it the school? Was it the city and its gun violence on the South Side? All of the above?
It's a great question. So there was a Spencer Foundation postdoctoral fellowship, and Spencer focuses on education. And my dissertation research was situated in a junior high school in Harlem. So I had followed 25 kids for 3 years, and out of the 25, 15 were boys and 10 were girls, and I used the boys for my dissertation. So I started my work in a school trying to understand the context, social context of adolescent violence in schools and communities and households. And I started that at, you know, that was initiated at Rutgers, and Mercer Sullivan, who is now retired, shout out to him, had hired me as one of the researchers on his adolescent violence research project. So it's myself, my colleague and good friend, Pedro Mateo Helibert, and Barbara Miller. And we were all at the Vera Institute of Justice, and Mercer was a director there, and he was also a professor at Rutgers. So long story short, when I graduated and I found out about the Spencer fellowship, postdoctoral fellowship, I applied for it. I thought it was a long shot. And in fact, there was another fellowship that I applied for, which was at Baylor School of Medicine. So again, I was already at that point in my career, already engaging in the medical field. And that postdoc was focused on HIV and correctional populations, which ultimately I ended up doing in my postdoctoral training at Morehouse School of Med and Chapel Hill School of Med. But I was awarded the postdoc at Baylor, which was in Houston, the School of Medicine. And then like a few days later, they called me back and said that they could not give me the fellowship because they didn't think that they had an adequate mentor for me over that time period. And so I was like, damn, this is crazy. And within 24 hours, I ended up getting a call from the University of Chicago offering me the postdoctoral fellowship there. And to Edgar Epps, who was my mentor, and Waldo Johnson, who is still my mentor to this day, is in the School of Social Service Administration, became my mentors there. And I was fortunate that my uncle lived in Chicago. It was my fictive uncle. And he had a condo in Hyde Park, which was no less than a few blocks away from the university. And he was staying in North Carolina at the time. So his condo was empty and he needed someone to stay there. So it just worked out, that I had a condo, I had a place to live. I didn't have to worry about looking for a place to live. I'm at one of the top universities in the country, and I'm on the south side of Chicago. And Chicago was a blessing for me in many ways. I don't know if any people that are watching this understand the trauma that you go through when you're doing a dissertation, but I needed a fresh start, and Chicago provided that for me and allowed me to really hone my craft. And so I started getting into, I wrote my first article there, which was on the role of the Black uncle, which at that point there were no articles written about the Black uncle in the lives of Black male youth. And I started my filmmaking there, and it just gave me a fresh start, and it was a launching pad for me to be where I am right now. So yeah, I really appreciated that experience of being in Chicago at that time.
So you talked a little bit about the Life After the Gunshot documentary. So where can folks view that? Where can people see it?
You can go to our website at www.lifeafterthegunshot.com. You can Google, or you can go on YouTube. It's also on YouTube, Life After the Gunshot. If you Googled it, I'm sure it will come up with all the places that we've been featured. And we're also on social media. So you can find us on Facebook, same name, Instagram, same name, and Twitter. So we're on every social media platform. We have our own website, and we're also on YouTube.
Great. So do you have any final thoughts?
No, I would say, and I've expressed this to the dean. So I really want to be candid about this, and it's probably one of the reasons why I was selected. Rutgers had a long history for me. And I'm sure I speak for other Black students who matriculated through the program. When I graduated in 2003, I was the third Black male to get a PhD from Rutgers in 30 years. I think the school opened in 1972, 73.
Somewhere around there. I don't know the exact year.
Somewhere around there. I was the third Black male to get a doctorate there. It wasn't easy. I didn't have any Black professors the entire time I was there, right? It was a very lonely experience. I started with 2 Black men. I didn't start with 2, but there were 2 in my cohort, both died. One of my colleagues, Troy, I'm blanking on Troy's last name, and Keith, but Troy started with me. And I think in my maybe first year or second year, he committed suicide. And then we had another brother, Keith, who came in, it might have been my third or fourth year. He died from an illness. I don't want to say what it was, but he died very early, young guy. So, you know, there were 3 Black men, and then I was the only one. And then after they died, we didn't recruit any, at least during the period of time that I graduated. But I want to say, you know, there are things that have happened that were positive, and also things that happened that were negative. You know, the positive aspects of it, I wouldn't be on this call with you if it wasn't for, you know, Dean Al Record. And I'll just give you a little story why. When I started at Rutgers, I had no intention of getting a PhD, none. I only enrolled in the master's program. And the reason why I enrolled even in the master's program is because at that time, I was really interested in like Silence of the Lambs and serial killers. And I thought, you know, majoring in criminology might provide me with an entree to do that kind of work. And after my first year, which I had a fellowship paid for my first year, and I couldn't afford to come back for the second year. And I told Dean Record at the time that I couldn't afford to come back. I said, let me see if I could do something. Called me back a few days later, and he was like, Joe, I got some good news for you and some bad news, depending on how you take it. So what you want to hear first? I said, I'll take the good news. He was like, well, the good news is, you know, I found the money for you to come back. But the bad news is that you're in the PhD program now. And so Al Record placed me in the PhD program. I didn't apply, right? I didn't go through it, you know, I didn't even realize until years later that you had to actually apply for a PhD program. I thought that it was because I was just placed in one automatically. I thought that that's all you had to do. So he put me in a PhD program, and the next year, that year, I think he retired. So I never got to formally like thank him. So I just want to say that, like, if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Would have never thought about getting a PhD. So that was amazing. And then also Mercer Sullivan, who invited me to be part of his ethnographic research team, which was critical at that stage in my career because I didn't have a dissertation topic. I knew that I didn't want to do anything quantitative, right? I wasn't into statistical analysis. And to this day, I'm still not. I mean, I know mixed methods is critically important, but you know, I just love qualitative methods. And Mercer introduced me to ethnography and what an ethnographer did. And even once I got out into the field, I knew that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Like this is me, being out here and on the ground and writing the stories and the field notes and the interviews and now filming. Like he opened my whole world up to that. And I would not have had that experience had he not invited me to be part of his research team and served as a mentor. And we had our trials and tribulations. It wasn't always sweet. And, you know, for a long period of time, you know, as a doctoral student, I was, you know, I had my issues and hangups over him being my advisor. But I think as you get older and you mature, you realize and understand the things that you should be grateful for. And I'm grateful that I had that relationship and that he thought enough to bring me onto his project and mentor me, because I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing right now. So those two things are like the bookends
Yeah.
of my experience at Rutgers. And then you have what happened in between, right?
Right. Right.
Which was like, you know, a lot of institutional racism in terms of lack of Black faculty, few Black students. I think they're, you know, they're working on that right now. Time will tell if it's performative or not. But you know, those were my experiences there. So I just have to say that.
Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being candid. I do know that here, specifically at Rutgers Newark, and probably across the entire system, we really do like to hang our hat on our diversity, and not so much the commitment to it, but really the number of students from underrepresented populations, which now aren't necessarily going to be the case combined. They will more than likely be to the point where there won't be a quote unquote minority student group. But that fact is for the undergraduate experience solely, right? And so hearing this these experiences, or hearing this input from alumni from the graduate level just prove that there's so much work to still be done. And I know there is a push. I've only been here about a year and a half. I started right before the pandemic. But I do know that there is a push, or at least a desire, to want to address those concerns head on. And so like you said, it'll just be a matter of time to see how it happens, and starting to find those prospective students and find the right mix to get them here, whether it's more faculty that look like them, whether it's more opportunities that entice them, or even if it's scholarship money for them or fellowship money for them. It's not enough to just think, oh, well, we'll increase the number of scholarships and fellowships for students, and that will help our diversity numbers.
Right.
That in itself is a bit of a racist thought, to think that folks who need money, the prospective students of color just need money and that'll solve all problems. So I do know that there is concerted efforts from some of our schools to recruit and retain more faculty of color, and then find other ways to recruit and retain graduate students of the same populations.
Yeah, I mean,
But check on us and call us out. Feel free to call us out.
I think the reason why we're having this conversation is because I called it out.
Good.
Right? So
continue.
And I just want to. I think I had a real candid conversation with Bill McCarthy, the dean, the new dean, about my experiences and thoughts regarding race and where we are in the country, and particularly within the academy in terms of anti-Black racism. And he respected my candor, and which is probably why I was selected for you to interview.
Be here, right?
So, I just look forward to the possibilities that Rutgers will hold true to its commitment to diversity, and particularly within a school of criminal justice. I mean, we deal directly with, you can't escape or elude the conversation around race. Like, it's
absolutely
impossible, right? With a system that has disproportionately destroyed, the lives of Black Americans from its inception, right? As a continuation of slavery. So there's no way that we should not have equal and adequate and equitable representation of Black scholars in that school, in addition to Black students. There's just
Well, the new president has a real commitment to it, and started a new office, DE&I office, that is charged with, exploring and increasing that space in all levels, whether it's, staff, faculty, students, retention, and all things that are related directly or indirectly to diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. That's really what she's tasked with. And she's relatively new, although she's probably been here maybe a year, but there is a commitment from higher up, and it's just a matter of just making sure that it's met at all levels, and that commitment is real at all levels. But like I said, continue to be engaged, continue to call us out, and find ways or highlight and shine light on ways that we can improve, because that's the only way for us to really have a culture of wanting to, assess and reassess, is for somebody to tell us, hey, you've gotten lazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we appreciate it.
Yeah. I mean, and I would, last thing I would say, and this is also part of the narrative, is that like this probably is the first time I've had a real conversation with anyone from Rutgers about my career or anything that I've done. And to me, it's, we're like 18 years into a missed opportunities to capitalize on that, right? So if you really wanted to uplift the school and recruit high caliber scholars of color and students, this story and stories like mine, and I know other, Bahia Muhammad, look, I don't know if you guys are interviewing Bahia Muhammad.
Yeah, I don't know the full list, but I was going to email you afterwards and ask you if you could put together a short list.
Yeah.
You mind doing that?
Yeah, no, not at all. You guys should be interviewing Bahia Muhammad. She's at Howard. She's doing amazing work on children of incarcerated parents. Amazing work. She's a graduate of Rutgers. So, I mean, you have like tons of, not tons, but you have some Black scholars out there who Rutgers School of, Rutgers, not just the School of Criminal Justice, but Rutgers should be uplifting the alumni that are coming out of the School of Criminal Justice. Like,
that's kind of what this is, and it sparked, like I said at the beginning, from the 75th anniversary, and I'm really doing a concerted effort, making a concerted effort to find these alumni and do a lot of these profiles and these stories, and then asking them who else is out there, right? And it's a lot easier in this virtual world for me to connect with somebody. Before, they would have to be in Newark, or I would have to be wherever they are. But now it's just, do you have Wi-Fi? Let's log on and carve out an hour. Exactly. And so we'll definitely look to do a lot more of these. So I will, I'll shoot you a note after we hop off, and just any names you can think of, feel free to share them with me, and I'll start making outreach. Yeah,
I have a few.
So perfect.
Just let me
I'll throw your name in the email. Maybe that'll
definitely.
reel them in.
I know.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time. I do appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Once we have a video and stories created, like I said, I'll share those with you to just approve, and then we'll start to publish them.
Gotcha. Look forward to it.
All right. Thanks so much.
Appreciate you.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.